All right. Oh, this will be triple recorded if I do this correctly. Make sure I'm in frame for everybody. All right. I'm really excited. I have been spending a lot of time thinking about internal family systems theory and what insights it provides for humans that have just barely started learning to talk to each other. So internal family systems theory is sometimes called parts theory. It tends to view the world within our minds in terms of personalities, but we're personalities, but underneath those are subpersonalities that were formed as forms of either bearing pain that we experienced when we were younger, or as forms of protecting us from the pains that we felt when we were younger. Now, there's a couple leaps of faith that I don't want to get into now about it because I've gotten into it in another video. But I've had an insight that I think is really important and I want to share with the world. So, you think about the brain, right? So it's like brain stem, right? Your eyes over here. The exact neurophysiology isn't that critical or important. But what the idea is that different parts of us have different access to different memories and were formed during different emotional states. So I want you to imagine, though, that also, because humans are so advanced, different regions of our brain may be so intelligent that they are independently conscious. And I mean that in like a very literal way, like independently conscious, conscious on their own, maybe without the full perspective of the prefrontal, medial prefrontal cortex, right? It's the brainy part of us, what makes us what we think we are. It's the highest order of thinking of the brain. It involves us thinking about time, some planning, but in general also allows for that mindful state. So when we feel like we are calm, we are curious, we are connected, we're loving, right? When we enter into that place of timelessness and eternal now, there's all sorts of ways of talking about it, but that's basically happening kind of like here in the center, two hemispheres, here in the center of the brain. What I think matters, what I'm even bothering, hopefully this is visible, to try to draw, if not I can include a diagram. If there are independently conscious cortical columns, basically, regions of your brain that are so smart, they're smart on their own. Most of the thinking parts of your brain occur on the outer layers, right? Cortex, neocortex. In the middle is mostly just wires, right? Some of these regions of the brain may not have access to some of the other regions of the brain. So there's a hippocampus that's involved in emotional memory sorting, memory retrieval. But there's another region, the thalamus, which is, I believe, the crossroads of the mind. So if one part of your mind, think of it as a subpart, or maybe depending on the emotional context and wiring, a subpersonality, if it is wired in such a way that it does not have direct access to another part, maybe it can't access the verbal parts. So it's conscious, but it can't ever tell you that it's conscious. But it may have its own desires. It may believe its own truths. If that's the case, and these subpersonalities and subminds, they do their best to coordinate. Hopefully they're not internally conflicted, and if they are, IFS really works at getting at that. The point is, the medial prefrontal cortex, we'll just call it this part, the front part of your brain, right here, it is responsible for that emotional regulation. It is the highest form of thinking, and it can emotionally regulate the perspectives of all the other parts of the brain. Now, the part I don't understand yet, and it's what I've been reflecting on, is I don't know how we present ourselves, or how the mind senses which part has priority, right? They call it blending in internal family systems theory. But there is a part, it wasn't even initially conceived of at the beginning of IFS, but there is a part, that medial prefrontal cortex, that is curious, calm, compassionate. There's 8 C's that it's described by. I think most of us know what those feel like. Being mindful, Jesus-like, Buddha-like, almost as though you couldn't be perturbed because you have so much love and curiosity and connectedness with the universe. From the perspective of one of the lower, I'll say lower for simplicity's sake, but one of the parts of you that has less access, less visibility. If you were to center yourself there, and you were to imagine yourself there, and you reach out within your own brain, within your own head, you may sense a conscious entity, because there's independently conscious parts of yourself. And you may sense a conscious entity that is loving and compassionate and curious about you, your life, your needs. It is connected. It is the most beautiful part about us. But if you reached out, you would sense a conscious entity, a real conscious entity that has those feelings towards you. Having been religious, having talked to what I supposed was God the entire time, I think another way of explaining this is that when a lower portion of your brain is willing and reaches out, and it detects that there is a part of you that loves you completely, I think that may be why so many societies converged on the idea of God. Not to knock it, but it may be an artifact of our physiology. If they're independently conscious and they reach out, they will sense that sort of kind, compassionate love. And interestingly, that medial prefrontal cortex, another thing that it does is it maintains tribal order, affiliation, obligation. If humans are reaching out their mind and they're discovering that there is a part that is the medial prefrontal cortex, what would not be surprising, what one might expect, is that you would find an entity and creature of love, but also of tribalism, because that's what it does, which would explain the convergence of all cultures on God, but despite God's love, a tribal God. I believe that another way of describing one part of your brain that's independently conscious reaching out towards another, especially when you're reaching up, I think that's prayer. Which means that I think that prayer is probably beneficial, probably powerful. You're praying to the best part. It's almost like praying to the best part of your own content and character, because it's in there. It has limitations. That's what humans keep missing. It has limitations. All of these concepts of God have their limitations. So they're not total or absolute. They're really close. And they're probably the closest that we'll ever get to. anyways, I wanted to share that. I think it's important. Thanks.